Please give Jenny a warm MECA Portland welcome.
So thank you so much for coming. My name is Jenny Kroik, and as he said, I kind of going to go through more of the narrative side of fashion. So a lot of my work is about sort of observing people and capturing them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So just about me a little bit, I was born in Russia, I grew up in Israel. I went to school in Boston, and then I went to school in Eugene, Oregon, because I thought my full name is Eugenia, so I was like, oh, I'll move to Eugene. So I have a kind of a random background. And I'm going to go back and talk about the covers in a bit, but those are my three kind of crown achievements, my New Yorker covers. So I'll get back, kind of circle around to them towards the end, and you guys can ask me any questions after I kind of go over. So I have always a hard time kind of structuring lectures of my work because it's very kind of chaotic and the process is a little bit here and there and very playful. So I might kind of jump back and forth certain things. So this is a painting, this is a self-portrait of me in my first New York apartment, which is kind of where I want to start the lecture. I'm going to just jump into where I kind of developed this recent style, but I'll show a lot of my experimentation stuff that I've done to get here. And then New York is also kind of the place where I decided I really want to go for illustration. Before that, I studied illustration in my undergrad, and then I took a really long break from it when I went to grad school and kind of did more academic art and did a lot of experimentation and sort of sat around and looked at squirrels in my backyard and just sort of wondering what I should do next. And then I kind of went back and said illustration is the thing I really love. I love kind of colorful and happy things. I love to communicate with people, paint actual people, and have the art be used for something. Like, it's really exciting to see it in a magazine or sort of a more, I love art in reproduction, and making art for galleries really made me nervous for some reason. So I felt like this is a more fluid and responsive way of working. And also this is kind of, the first apartment was a real like New York experience where we had a really terrible landlord who turned off our heat and hot water. We had mice, they turned off our gas. So this is me kind of staring at the radiator because I'm really cold. So that was that. Also, I've been teaching for about 12 years now, and I'm used to talking a lot, but usually people are sketching when I talk. So if anyone feels like sketching while you listen to the lecture, I'm totally cool with that. And then you can post the drawings of me kind of doing weird things with my gestures and post it if you'd like. And these are my lecture notes. This is what I do when I go to lectures. So kind of moving to New York City was a really great move because it sort of helped me develop the things I love, which is people watching. And a lot of sort of the beginning of my style was a lot looser, and a lot of it is because there was so many different things to look at. And I was like, oh, look at her, look at her. So I was trying to get as much as possible, and I developed my style kind of to go with that. So I work pretty small, and I work with gouache, and I'm a watercolor person, but I discovered gouache, which allows you to be more opaque and add more details. So I think the style kind of worked with what I wanted to do. A lot of them were in sketchbooks or on tiny pieces of paper, which made me feel kind of less stressed and more like this is kind of a process, and it actually helped me a lot. So these are all ladies that I saw in an opera event that I went to. The opera was great, everyone really dresses up, so kind of finding where to people watch was another thing that I thought about. But really in Oregon, when I started kind of developing my style, you had to really search for the crowds because I lived in Eugene, Oregon, which was a pretty small place, so I had to like look for interesting things. So then when I went to New York, I was like, it's everywhere. So that was great. And then one thing I was thinking about when I was painting, so there was kind of an overload of stimulation and too many visual things, and I was thinking my style has started to develop more of like what to focus on. So I was thinking what's worth painting, what is interesting, how do I tell the story? So I started to, it's almost like putting a spotlight or like a filter, which is kind of maybe a bad way to think about it. It's like the Jenny Instagram filter. What do I want to include? What do I want to exclude? I take a lot of photographs and notes, and sketches, sort of working from those, picking the interesting things. So thinking about this lady, which I just liked her, but then adding like the street element, and then maybe a little bit something about, you know, the environment that she was in, and then simplifying the color is really important. So I was thinking about developing like a color palette that tells a story also, and I'll talk more about that. Other things that I was thinking about are expression, gesture, pattern. All these things are part of the narrative. So sometimes something catches my attention, and I think sort of coming from a more academic background, I would like overthink things maybe, but sometimes like you see someone with a really cool skirt, that could be a story. So it doesn't have to be like you start from that and then you build on it, and suddenly you have this whole kind of conversation of patterns and play of things that kind of correlate to one another. So the story doesn't have to be something very solid. It could be sort of implied and very visual and fun. And again, I love complementary colors, so orange, blue. And as I said, I came from a background where I was doing mostly watercolor. So I started learning watercolor when I was 14 with a very kind of traditional Russian teacher. I'm Russian too, and she was sort of taught us that technique where like you plan everything in advance. If you make a mistake, you're done. So I and I liked it when I was younger. I felt it was a challenge, but then I discovered gouache when I was working with Diane Bigda, my kind of mentor from college. So she was doing gouache, and I was like, wait, this is watercolor, but you can make mistakes. You can go over it, and you can do the white on top of the black. And so, and a lot of times I'll try to stay looser, like I did here, and let things kind of run, like her hair, and I sort of love that. And then you can start with that and build a little bit of opaqueness on top. So I think part of that process, I think, helps me to stay loose a little bit, and you'll see that later my paintings got a little tight, and it's where I am right now, where I'm trying to get back to a little bit more loose and playful. Also thinking about different locations in the city, and different locations have different people. So this lady was this super stylish lady on Fifth Avenue, and then also thinking about the story of like how people sort of fit into this space, so you kind of get this full impact when you see the buildings and the lighting, and they're sort of kind of center stage with all their clothes. So I thought it's interesting to go into different areas of the city and feel this sort of matching between the personalities and the backgrounds and the architecture. So I like to kind of think about what to include and what to exclude. Thinking about focus to like her purse. Yeah. It also looks like she had a little face, but it wasn't. It's just like a fun pattern on her purse. So that was what I was thinking there. And then again, thinking about keeping it loose, and then looking at other artists. So here I was thinking kind of Hockney-esque sidewalk, and then the background is very wash, sort of that banisters kind of runs into itself. So again, focus and keeping things really fast and sketchy. And then again, as I said, sometimes stories just come to you. So always being prepared with like a sketchbook and your phone, and I'm always kind of like on guard, and it's like trying to capture as much as I can. And then thinking about the story behind the things that I see, this is what I really love about it. So I was thinking, I see this lady and I'm thinking, does she have a really giant apartment? Or does her dog like sleep in a little drawer? Like, because this is New York City, so I was like, what's what do they do every day? And the funny thing is, after I painted this, a few weeks later, I actually saw her again. And it was funny when you live in New York for a while, I actually started recognizing people I've kind of creeped on and took pictures of and painted and saw them again. I was like, you look very familiar. I was like, oh, right, I painted you and your dog. So that was cool to run into her again. And then also kind of constructing the story. So I think a lot about motivation behind making art. So one of it is sort of, kind of building a career and being, as I used to say to people, like, I want to be a real girl, give me a job. So you feel like you have this kind of validation. But I think the strongest motivation for me is the sort of communication and doing art that actually you see people respond to it and it does something, and it also kind of, a great thing about, especially with social media, was to find people and actually meet them and then develop this relationship. So this is my friend Joan, who actually sadly moved away from the city, but she visits a lot, and every time she visits, we hang out. And I did this sketch of her that looks like the video "Aha," if you remember, "Take on Me." So I thought it was like, when I met her, we went to the botanical gardens and I sat on a cactus. That's my memory of that day. But we sketched each other, and I thought, well, I'm just a weirdo and she'll never want to talk to me again. But then I went home and sketched her again, and I think maybe something about sort of coming back and saying, hey, look, there's a painting of you, and then she painted me, and so it was like a really great way, and we kind of been good art friends ever since. And so this is kind of the quick sketch, and then I did a more solid painting later in my studio. And then we started hanging out a lot and then painting each other. And then we came up with this idea of the Joe Nanny Challenge, which we do sometimes on Instagram. So every once in a while we'll pick a woman that we really love, mostly with women or just somebody we admire, and then do a painting either inspired by that person or just a portrait of them. And then we kind of call other people to join us and tag it or whatever, and then we share each other's work. So it's kind of a way to get a mini community and to talk about things we love. So this was a painting inspired by Frida Kahlo, the two Fridas. So this is me and Joan. She's now away, so we communicate through our phone. And this is her turtle, Sheldon. And I put a cactus in her pocket because she moved to, she lived in New Mexico at the time. And then this is her painting that she did of us, which is really beautiful. So this was a fun experiment. And then we also did one of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And also I like to sometimes turn paintings into little gifts, just for fun. And then this actually was fun because tons of people participated and we got a lot of responses. And then this is another one we did, this is for Patti Smith. This is just other people who participated and tagged us, and so it was really cool to see just random, invent something random and people just jump in and get excited. So that was a lot of fun. And then some other people who inspired me. So this is my friend who's a New Yorker cartoonist, and we kind of met and shared our love for crayons. So it's a way for shared materials, and I used her crayons and tried them out and drew her this ridiculous drawing of her. And then this is her work. So kind of talking to other people and seeing their work, thought process, and especially with cartoonists, because they're always seeing jokes everywhere and they're seeing things in a really cool way. So I think it sort of also helps me evolve and think about my work in a different way. And I'm going to go back and talk about the one on the bottom right. So you can, I'll go back to that. And then this is a painting I did of her, also in a bookstore. So then she introduced me to another cartoonist who actually lives on her block, but we collaborated, so he wrote a piece and I illustrated it for humor for the New Yorker. And this was about kind of horrible New York summers and horrible things that happen to you. So this is, and I tried to put as many peeing dogs in the background as I could in each frame. Because you see that a lot. And this is actually, I used myself for this painting, which was true story. And then I also included Sophia. She was really cool about about posing for me, and this is something I also do with a lot of the friends that I make them pose for me for different illustrations, and she did such a good job posing that I actually used her twice here. So this is her and her evil twin having brunch in a really gross Manhattan street environment. And then some of you might know the work of Jennifer Kroik, so I took, this is a really bad photo of her, so if you know her, don't tell her. I just couldn't find any other ones. And then she's an amazing artist, and she did a lot of, she does a lot of surface design, so we talked a lot about kind of the difference between narrative and surface design and decorative art. This is examples of her work. You guys can look her up as well. And then it's just so beautiful and whimsical, and she's a lot about sort of pattern, something that I like a lot, but I have a hard time sometimes thinking about it. And then just sort of incorporating her ideas into some of my work. I kind of tried this out with this sort of decorative, more decorative floral design, and making it a little bit more simple, not simple, but like more flat, I guess, more pattern-like. And then kind of continuing with that idea and thinking about how one painting inspires another one, and I thought, well, the previous one, I liked that one, what if I kind of simplify the color palette, and I actually used a reference photo of my friend that I took 7 years before, and I meant to use it and I never did, and this felt good, like finally I used these reference photos that I made you pose for. And then other people, a lot of times, you know, sooner or later when I hang out with someone, especially if I like them, I end up painting them. So that happens a lot. She's actually also a client, so that was fun to like become friends with a client. She's very cool. Also, art is a great way to bond with your family, and I try to, it's something I didn't do when I was younger because I was afraid of, like, you know, parents criticizing what I do, and now I don't care anymore, so I just draw them, and they have a good time, and I make my mom draw with me. And then me and my dad came up with this tradition where every time I visit them, we buy a pineapple, and I make him pose with a pineapple, and I paint him. So it's fun to invent like little games, and it's, you know, improve the relationships in the family. So another thing I want to talk about is generating your own work, and something that's really hard when you're a freelancer and there's no clients and there's no emails is to, what do I do next, what do I do now? So one thing I thought of, the first cover that I did of the bookstore, and I thought that was really fun to do. So I decided to go around the city and just look for as many independent bookstores as I can, because I really love the independent bookstores, and they all have different personalities and characters. And I also like to see what kind of people could go to these different bookstores in different areas of the city, so it sort of changes. They all have very interesting personalities. So this was Book Culture, which is also partially like a student bookstore for Columbia, so it was fun to see all these textbooks. And I kind of moved things around and just include the things that I think tell the story of that specific environment or area. So I like the yellow chair, that kind of stuff. That was a thing.
And Marx was on the floor.
Oh yes, yeah. And Hegel is like staring creepily from the top. And one of the other bookstores I discovered was Idlewild Bookstore. So whenever I'd be in an area in New York and I'd have a spare moment, I'll always look on my phone and say, is there a bookstore around here? So I just literally wandered into different bookstores, not knowing anything about them. And this was a really sweet travel bookstore. So it just specializes in travel. And they had language classes. So I said, oh, I'm going to sign up for a language class. This is a random thing. It was like I always wanted to improve my Spanish. So I took a Spanish class, and I loved my teacher, and I really wanted to paint him as like a thank you because he worked so hard. And then I thought, well, I want to paint him anyway. And then I was going to propose some more stories for the New Yorker Online because they always look for content. And I proposed that as a story. about kind of being like a person who's learning a language as an adult, and what are the difficulties or challenges. So they let me do it, which was cool, and I ended up painting my my teacher, who's in the middle, Lalo. He's very cool, and I interviewed him and asked him like, what are sort of incentives for adults to learn Spanish in the city? So he gave me like different bands that are playing, this area in Red Hook that has all this authentic food carts, and they play soccer all day long. So I asked him like different phrases to say, and then he introduced me to Bombay Stereo, which I really love. And there's always people playing softball in my neighborhood, and I always want to join, but I'm terrible at softball and I can't really speak Spanish, so I was like, maybe, can I play? And I also got to paint my neighbors. I made them pose for the chanfle, which is apparently means something like darn. I asked them what's a good word that everybody from different South American countries would like a cultural thing that everyone might recognize. So he suggested that. So you can tell me later if that's true or not. But I asked a bunch of different people. And then another bookstore I painted was West Sider Bookstore, which is in Upper West Side. And then after I paint bookstores, I do a lot of research for the things I do. I love to kind of see what's online, what people say about it, and just curious, like what, and a lot of times I'll join their social media, so I'll get a lot of their announcements. So after I painted this, and I heard that they're closing, that they actually have to go out of business. So I proposed that as a story for the New Yorker as well, and they liked the story, and it was like kind of over the weekend. By Monday, they've raised enough money to stay in business. So it changed. I was like, we'll change the story, and it was like sort of the surprise ending. So it was interesting. So I went down and I interviewed people who were at the store and asked them why they liked the store, and kind of made, they actually said they can't use this one because I already posted it. They like everything to be fresh and new. So over the weekend I made like 8 new paintings and I had to rest after that. But it was a lot of fun. So that was a great kind of fun random thing that happened. And then I kept going back to the Strand, which is the store that I painted for the cover. I love that store. It's huge. It's got a giant art section, and then always really cool kind of NYU people or local people or everybody kind of looks really interesting in there. And this is their rare books room, which is just amazing. It has all these, beautiful books that I'm afraid to touch. So then after I was painting them for a while, I had this random idea to do a sketchy book club, which is kind of like a book club where everybody sketches each other and talks about the books that they love. And I just knew one of the people who was doing the events for the Strand, and I just sent like a random message on Instagram. It's like, what do you think about this idea? And immediately she set everything up. She's like, great, let's do it. Like, when can you come? So it happened, and it was, I organized it, and then I asked online, like, who wants to do readings, and lots of people wanted to do readings, and I had a woman who plays the guitar, and she took Shel Silverstein poems and turned them into songs, so that was really cool. And a lot of other cover artists came, so that's George Colombo, and some of my former students came, which was awesome. And then, so here's the woman who's painting, who's singing the Shel Silverstein. And then from those events, I actually got more painting material. So I was like, oh yes, come to me, people in cool outfits. So yes, there were a lot of beautiful kind of scenes and airs. So I ended up getting really excited and painted a lot from the event that I organized. And then my agent sent a bunch of them, so they ended up in communication arts, the whole series, so that was really fun. And then some people, this bookstore actually sent me a message and said, come to our bookstore. So I was like, sure. This was a really cool bookstore that's community run, and it has a lot of Spanish language books and a lot of events that they put up themselves. it's all volunteers. And I thought this is great, and I painted them. And then they invited me to do a show of all my bookstore paintings in their bookstore. So we ended up doing that, and then I met my friend Ellen, who actually volunteers there and helped me set up the show. So this was the opening. And then my client came, so that was nice. And actually wanted to show you the paintings are rather small, so I work pretty small, which is actually really good for me because I produce so much and I paint every day. So there'd be like too much, and my apartment's tiny, so it's good for all kinds of reasons. But when you have to show your work, it's kind of hard. So I ended up just printing them larger and doing a reproduction, and some of the reproductions I thought looked nicer than the original, which is kind of what illustration's all about, so that's good. But then, so I met my friend Ellen, who is also a cartoonist, so we meet a lot and do drawings, and she actually helped me set up the whole show, which was amazing of her. She does a lot for the bookstore. She cares a lot about the community, so that's great. And then as a thank you, I made a painting of her and her husband and their cats. And then I thought, this could be a good series. So, so one thing kind of like leads to another. Let's see. And then from the opening, I also got a lot of good drawing material and reference. So I was like, oh, this cool woman came, so I painted her and I did another one. And then also another painting from a person who came, and I'm going to segue into my process from this slide. So just to show you, I use a lot of photo reference, and just to show you a little bit about kind of what I pick and choose from the photo, I might go back and take more photos of the area or the bookstore or whatever I'm painting, and then I'll simplify a lot of things and maybe exaggerate some things like postures. And then as the process, usually I don't do any underdrawing. I directly sketch with a brush, and that's just to kind of keep it loose. And something about the pencil just makes me feel really stiff. I just kind of lose all, I just draw, I'm like, So I think I learned from just following what feels kind of more better when you paint, and I kind of say, okay, if I don't have to do an underdrawing in a pencil, I can just do it this way because it feels more immediate and less stressful. So I start with layering. I'll do kind of a light wash, and I'll just build up paint more and more on top with the gouache. And then some of them I'll keep like looser, like in the background, because I like some of the washes that happen. And for photo reference, this is another example. This is a very complex painting. So actually I met this woman, I read about her in an article. She does like historical recreation, like with different outfits. She makes her own outfits. And she was thrown out of the Met because they thought that she stole like an antique dress. So I thought, oh my God, she's amazing. So I sent her a message and like wanted to paint her forever. So I ended up going to this bookstore that looked very old-timey. It's the Argosy bookstore, which I guess the Clintons still buy their books from. So I was like, oh, I want to include everything. The store's amazing. So I had a ton of detail. So when I worked, I had about like 16 photos open on my giant desktop, and I was like, so sometimes I need a lot of different reference to paint something. Sometimes it's simpler. So basically, just to talk a little bit about what I use. So I'll use multiple photos, and sometimes I'll montage them in Photoshop just so it's easier, so I don't have to look at 10 different directions. So I'll just make the composition and work from it. I'll use internet reference. I'll sketch on location, or if it's something like a prior knowledge. So like this mushroom, for instance, they actually had that felt mushroom. But sometimes it'll be something that it's easy to paint, but I'll get so obsessed about having something very specific that I might spend like an hour looking for like a mushroom that looks like what I want it to look like. And I'll be like, wait a minute, I could have just made that up. But it's sort of that balance of like being very loose, like what I showed in the beginning, and just getting too tight or tight when you need to be, like if it's something very specific. Like portraits for clients, a lot of times they'll want it to be, a certain way, so you have to keep it tighter. This was an idea I had. It would be kind of stories from people of weird things that happen to them in bookstores. So this guy's very sweet. He works at the book culture, and I see him a lot. So I was like, "Do you want to, participate in this?" And he said yes. And he told me a story about this time where someone just dropped a dog off, and it was like a rainy morning, and someone just gave him a dog and said, "Hold my dog, I'll be right back." And they went to the post office, and he was just there with the dog, wondering, "Will this person ever come back?" They did, but but this was like. I'll try to illustrate that. So I found the dog online. I was like, what would be a good face for that kind of dog? So other things I do is I sketch from life a lot, just for that reason of not getting too tight. I practice on my husband a lot. He's a captive audience. So, and then I try to use a lot of different media that I might not use in my sort of finished, the finished illustration. So charcoal, weird things I'll find in my art bin that I haven't used in years. Something that I looked online, or some other artist that used something that I was interested in. I'll also go and sketch in different places. So I love sketching in the Museum of Natural History. So here I tried oil pastels and kind of scratching with pencil. I found that to be actually a really good sketching tool that kind of looks like the gouache, because it's sort of opaque and the colors are really bright, but it's fast enough that you can take it with you and sort of sketch with it. So finding a tool that might be kind of similar but allows you to still be quick is one thing, or something totally different. So this is from Arthur Avenue, which is the third cover that I did. I went and did a lot of sketching and looked at different elements that I might want to include. This was marker and crayon, so kind of thinking about line weight, color, keeping what kind of color palette to have for a certain painting. And Jeff Goldblum, which I got to see at the Y. He was amazing. And painting friends, and sort of thinking about sketching as note-taking, and a lot of times I'll write down something that they're saying. This is my friend from Israel, so I wrote what she said in Hebrew. And thinking about sort of an interesting idea that might turn into a painting later. I also like to sketch in rough conditions, so this was like a very cold dead of winter. Right? No, actually no, there's flowers. There's just rain. But yeah, just sort of being uncomfortable, I think, when you sketch, sometimes it's really good, or if you're like in a crowd, or if you have something's uncomfortable, or so I feel like sometimes that's a good way to challenge yourself, and I'll look back at those sketches and I say, oh, there's something interesting about this, because I wasn't in my comfort zone. I was somewhere weird, and I was not expecting to come up with this idea, so it's good to go out. This is another one using some colored pencils, which I haven't used in years, and that was a lot of fun. I'll take my sketchbook almost everywhere. I think it's great to sketch, even though you can see my sketches are pretty different than my paintings, but I think it sort of helps evolve a lot of things. And sometimes I'll sometimes bring a few color tools with me. This is my husband. He's curious like a cat. But it's fun to add a little bit of color to the sketch, because then you also think about limited color palette, or if you only have a few color tools. When you go back to the studio, say, well, actually, I don't have to use all these colors. I can, limit what I'm doing. And then trying to be a bit more abstract. Again, my poor husband, my brother-in-law. And then thinking about, so like drawing without line, with line, thinking about color shapes. And then I was sketching with a friend, and she had these weird like paint markers that leaked, but it kind of made a weird cool shape. So sort of trying other people's materials is fun. This was at the roof of the Met, which is a cool place. They have this fun installation. And then again, just bringing, I like to sometimes when I sit at one place, I'll montage things that happen, and I might use it for something. So it's like building, this person's fishing, this is happening. Sometimes I'll take notes. Sometimes I'll bring watercolors with me. This is a beautiful part of Central Park that I love. And again, the rough conditions, I was painting in the rain, which is not bad for watercolor if you have a waterproof pencil. This is the botanical gardens where I also teach watercolor classes. So this was after a class. I was kind of in the mood, so. And again, listening into things and being sort of open to your environment. This was like, I saw this 5-year-old girl and she said, "It's not fair, the older I get, the less fun I have." And she was 5. And I thought, this is how I feel. So I was like, I have to write this down right away. But I tried not to stare at her too much because I think it's sometimes, like sketching other people's kids, you don't want to be creepy. So I'll just drew her from memory and written down what. And then this is like the whole Hall of Fame at the Bronx Community College where I teach, and it's just all these like old dudes. So I wanted to narrate them a little bit. And then, excuse my French here, I didn't say that, the woman said it. But this was the fashion exhibit, and I just love sometimes the people who go to exhibits are sometimes more interesting than the exhibit. So
Wait, what does it say?
it says, "I wear the fuck out of that." And sometimes the sketches are like ridiculous and bad, and I don't know if I'll ever use it for something. This is a random cartoon idea of businessmen riding the dragon from the Never-Ending Story, and it's called The Never-Ending Bummer. So it was I was like, I don't know how people go to 9 to 5 jobs every day, but it sounds like this might be something. I don't know, we'll see. So saving things, sometimes it's fun, and you look back at it and you say, I don't know, yeah, that could be something. And all these experiments, taking them back to the studio, so I want to show you a little bit where I work. So it's a tiny IKEA desk in my living room. That's my studio. And here's a few process things. So I'll show the top right one is the Washington Post piece. I'll show in a little bit. The middle one was a New Yorker idea that got rejected. And then I had another portrait going on there. And then this is kind of what it looks like usually, and now I have a bigger computer, which I bought. But so a few things I do before I start. I'll try to work every day, and I'll try to do something. Sometimes even not working is work related. Like if I have a weekend where I made 8 paintings, taking a few days off after that was work related, because sometimes it's better not to overdo it. Then you'll have like aversion to your desk and you're like, I don't even want to see this. So taking a few days off doing something else is also kind of work related. But usually I'll try to sit and work for about an hour. If I feel like really I don't want to work, I'll do some color mixing or studio maintenance, which I feel like is also really helpful. So whenever I feel like I need to do some color research, this is kind of a full process. I don't always do it this way, but sometimes I try because it's really great and useful. So I'll have a reference of different artists. So I have some different painters, and I think that's Chris Ware there, and some swatches that I sort of ripped from different things where I see a color and I go, oh, that could be an interesting color. I don't think I have that in my palette. And then I'll try to be a little bit scientific about it, where I'll kind of write down, what was the formula, why I liked it, why it works, why it doesn't work. And so here's a little bit of the process. So if I feel like maybe all my pinks or reds are too muted, and trying to find out what could be a good new mix. So this is how I work. This is what I learned from my mentor. She actually, my first job was to mix colors like that, so I kind of modified it a little bit, but it's pretty much the same. So I'll play on the palette, try different mixtures. I'll have a color book where I'll try different things. And then when I have a formula that I like, I'll write it down on the side. And I work with gouache, if I haven't mentioned it yet. So I work with gouache, and then I'll spritz it so it's sort of stays moist. Gouache is really expensive, so this is a good way to kind of keep it going for a really long time. And here's a few samples. So there's a Pinterest board I did for different reds in my little book of color studies. So here are a couple examples of palettes. I feel like I like to record them. I think a lot of people like to do that. I think the palette tells the story of the painting that you worked on. I think it's interesting to look at it, and you'll kind of remember what the painting that you worked on, was it like really muted, really bright? So palette tells a story. Sometimes it's late at night when I work. And having fun with studio maintenance. Sometimes it's really nice just to clean everything, and I'm kind of a neat freak when it comes to like having everything organized. I have a hard time starting to work if there's a huge mess, so I'll usually clean everything and make it neat. So here's gouache. Never really dries. Most of them don't really dry all the way. So if my tube dried, I'll just pry it out and spritz water in it, and then they'll come back to life. Clean some containers. I'll make myself little assignments for fun. Like for instance, if I have leftover paint, I'll just make a painting with it or whatever I have around, just to see what happens. And as I said, I work late at night, so I started. And I use Instagram. This was the first one. So this was before I got my first cover, and things were looking kind of grim. And I was just painting a lot and nothing was happening. And so I got this. So I was like, I'll put a face on it and he'll be my studio advisor. So I started a series of studio advisors. So this guy's like a very mindful strawberry. Wherever you go, there you are. It's a really mean carrot, so I ended up cooking it after. He's like not happy with my progress. And then this guy was a little, I don't know. So this guy was celebrating. So I mean, I think it's great to be silly. Like, I'm naturally a very serious Soviet person. It's like I have to, my work has to have meaning. So it's good to have some vegetables with eyes on. I also teach, and teaching is, I think, is a great way to think about what I do. And trying to explain to someone else what art is, or what's the process, or how do you draw, or why you do this or that, is actually a great way to say, like, I actually never thought about that. So then you come up with all these answers to different questions, and people always ask questions that you didn't expect them to ask. It's also a great free figure drawing. So this was my demos for figure drawing, and thinking about, well, which artist should they look at. And sometimes I think about things, I'm like, well, is it really necessary to do figure drawing? I don't know, it's kind of, it's very traditional, but maybe it's not, we don't need it, I don't know. So thinking about sort of things you always thought were like, necessary or proper, or like what's correct, and then thinking, how did it get this way? And so structuring the class is a very good process for me to think about my own work. And then also seeing other people respond to, like this, a lot of times I teach watercolor classes to people who never done watercolor, so I see things like sort of solutions that they respond to the medium in a sort of tactile way, and I was like, oh, that's cool, I never would have thought to use it this way or that way. This was one of the botanical garden classes, so that was also, I got to keep some of the flowers, so that's good. And then doing prep and kind of, having the joy of like getting ready for a class. And I think when I started, I thought teaching was like the last thing I wanted to do, and I kind of got thrown into it in grad school, and someone just said, here's a class, teach it. And so I started finding more kind of what's really fun to, what would I want to do if I was a student, and then sort of thinking about that. So preparing a class is really fun, and sometimes I bring my friends with me. And seeing seeing people doing like portraits for the first time, and they're always like really interesting and really fresh, and I get really inspired by seeing my students' work, so that's always good. And I get to use mediums I don't normally use, so sometimes I have to teach oil paints, which are like, so the opposite of what I use, so having this sort of, and also being kind of vulnerable when I do a demo, and I love doing demos because things always go wrong, and then you show the students, like, I don't know what I'm doing either, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway. So I'm just going to move into client work, which is a really big part of being an illustrator. This is a Washington Post piece that I did about movie heroines that are wearing high heels and why that's weird or ridiculous. So this is a really fun piece. And then thinking about, it's really challenging to work with clients sometimes because you have sort of specific things that they want in a certain way, and then there's also like your style and things, how you would work on things, and sometimes they'll clash, and you have to be really creative to find a way to bring in both your style and their ideas. So a few things that were hard in this one. One, I haven't seen any of these movies, and so I had to research, and I watched a lot of trailers, and my husband saw some of them, so he told me what happened. And then sort of the different poses. I normally don't do action poses, so I took a lot of comic book art books and looked at what comic artists do. So that was a good way of also like researching something, doing something I'm not used to. Bringing in humor was fun, and also thinking about color palette and thinking about like sort of what it would look like reproduced. It's always super exciting to see your work printed. So it never gets old. Like I haven't done that many, but it never gets old. And then just to compare, this is something that's kind of a great job because like they asked you to do something that's almost like your regular work that you would do anyway. So I did this whole series of people in museums. It's an ongoing thing. I've done like hundreds of these. So it was sort of something that I have almost like a formula to it, and I love the specific sort of shape of it and kind of orientation of the page. So I'm not used to, for the Washington Post, I normally don't do like long illustrations, so that was also a challenge. So this was one where it was really open, and it was the anniversary of the Women's March, and they asked us to do something about women, or something related to that. So I did the Museum of Extinct Human Behavior's Hall of Chauvinism. So there's a little flasher that's extinct. There's a mansplainer in the back, and the guy scratching himself. So that was a fun one. And I don't know who that guy is on the left. And sometimes you get, this was a really fun job where I got to do portraits. So portraits are something I do a lot, which I both love and hate because it's so hard, and it sort of goes against like the idea of staying loose because you have to be really specific, and you have to get the expression, and you have to get like the essence of that person. So it's almost like you have to get to know someone you never met. So I always look at a ton of, like, I'll maybe go to their Instagram page, see what they're like, kind of get the idea of their personality, and do a lot of research on whoever I'm doing. And it might be excessive, but I feel like I need that to understand like how to do that face. And I see a lot of illustrators who stay really loose with their portraiture, and I'm so jealous. And I was like, because I need to like have the specifics of that person. And then I'll just show this piece that I just did for Airmail, which is an online magazine about travel. So the idea was, the article was about people who misbehave in museums and take too many selfies and get in the way, and the guy was like, really didn't like these people. So I thought I'll just show you the sketches that I presented them. So I had, the artist just scandalized by these girls saying something really dirty, and then I had this idea of like the never-ending, like that you see the artwork through a series of people's phones, which I still kind of like. And then you can see they went with 3A, which is sort of, you just have the hat left of the Van Gogh. And then 3B is kind of similar to the first one, where the art is just like. And then after they picked that one, I like to have I feel like the painting works well when it's a specific person, when you have like a specific something in mind rather than a more abstract person. So a lot of times when I do my own work, I'll see something first, or I have like a full image in my mind, and then I'll realize it. When it's this way, you have to kind of go backwards. And actually that week I happened to see a friend of mine posting pictures of herself, and I thought, oh, she'd be great for that. So I asked her to send me lots and lots of photos of herself in that outfit, and there she is. So I was like, Paige, I loved your outfit. Can you do this? So then this became that.
Nice.
So I like to it helps to have a specific personality somehow. It just helps me tell the story. And this is a fun story about client work. The art director, this art director I worked with before, follows me on Instagram and sees a lot of my stories. I was at my parents' house watching Columbo, an episode where there's a painter who paints Columbo, and I just posted and said, I wish I could paint Columbo. And then he said, well, actually we had just a job came in about Columbo. Do you want to do it? I was like, yes. So this was a ton of fun. So sometimes you get to do the things you like. And then this is kind of a sad job story where this was a festival of the West Village of Greenwich Village, and they wanted like a map, and it had all this sort of writers and musicians and sort of influential moments, and I got really excited, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'd done a ton of research. I went down there and I was like, I can't wait to go back and like paint that church, and I had some really good reference for the Stonewall walk, and then the different, and then they just went with someone who didn't want any money for it. So it was just like a funding thing, so they didn't want to pay for it, which is kind of sad. But sometimes, then I always thought, like, I'll just go back and I'll do it on my own sometime. And I'll just do like a self-initiated project, but maybe a little bit different than what they wanted. So sometimes it doesn't work out, but I think it's also good to have that, then you know what you're excited about, and then you can say, well, if there's a demand for this kind of market or like this sort of work and I like to do it, then I'll do a few sort of self-generated projects and then put them out there, and then other people might say, there'll be a better client who actually wants to pay you, and then they'll ask you to do it. So. And then this was actually a super fun project for the Paris Review, that it was literary paper dolls. So you get to print them out and actually play with them. So if you go, you can download a PDF of this and cut this out. So the first one we did was for Franny and Zoe. So this was Franny, and I got really excited about this. And then the second story was Rebecca, and I actually got really into this project. I read the book and I saw the movie, and I ended up sending them more than what they asked for, just because I got really into it, and they were happy and I was happy. So sometimes you get great projects to work on. And I also ended up doing like a little animation for them, just as like, I wanted to see what it looked like, and I had all the different, I just combined it into an animation, and so I gave them more than they asked for, and they put it on their Instagram. They were happy, so that was it. So everyone read Franny and Zoe? Okay, and then just wanted to show a little GIF, and sometimes I like to animate it. I feel like the sort of narrative quality sometimes lends itself to being more animated and almost film-like. This is a really simple animation, but it's fun to do that as well. And then I left this guy in charge while I'm away. I think he'll do a great job. And oops. That's not mine. How do I go back? Okay. Should I go back to the first slide? Sure.
If you like, yeah.
Yeah.
Jenny, thank you very much.
Yeah. So does anyone have any questions about anything?
When? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you consider social media a huge part of your creation process in a way?
That's a good question. I think that some of the things I thought about when I was, when I lived in Oregon, I was sort of trying to figure out what I want to do next, and I think I wanted to do illustration, but it was also this sort of idea. Like I said, I'm like a very serious Soviet person. It's like, well, my work has to have meaning, and then I also wanted to like do something that people liked. And someone said, oh, you should join Instagram, and I just started, just playing around a little bit. So I think it was really great just to get this sort of feedback and like almost have like a focus group and see how people react to different things. So I think that was like how I started to kind of get away from having this very heavy, too many heavy questions, and it was sort of seeing that people saying, oh, we like this, we like that, and you start to have conversations with people. So I thought that was great, and I was also did one of those 100-day projects on Instagram, and I did a self-portrait a day, where I went to like Goodwill and tried on weird things, and and it was a great way just to like loosen up, both like, with my drawing and like mentally. So I just like, this is funny, and then people really responded to it, and then they started doing their own, like kind of sending me their pictures with their weird outfits, and I drew them. So it was also a way to kind of see that you can have what you do affects other people, and you kind of see it right away. So that's a good way to kind of keep going. And now I think, now social media is also a great way to get clients and get exposure, even though like they changed their algorithm now, so I feel like I'm back to zero, like I'm back to the start. So, and I felt like that was a good thing, because there's a point where you need to like have a balance. It's so addictive. You just like, it starts to be like a numbers game, like, oh, this one got 500 and this one got 400, like this is bad art and this is good art. And so it's good to say like, okay, maybe it's all just like robots and they don't know what they're doing. So does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Someone way in the back there. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I love your work, by the way. It's
Oh, thank
really
you.
great. But I was wondering, like, you seemed super calm when you were speaking about like getting like that one piece you worked hard on like rejected and stuff, and like how you say you're not worried about like what your parents say about your work. How did you get to a place of feeling like so confident and like not letting that drag you down?
Meditation. That one also, like, I think it has to do also with the social media. And I also kind of changed my attitude towards things, where I decided, this is what I want to do, so I'm just going to go the way and do it. And the more you send stuff out, you actually feel less nervous and you feel the impact less. So I think what I used to feel before is that I have to be ready before I even send anything out. It has to be perfect. It has to be like a finished product. So I think it also makes it more precious. And I think now where I'm just thinking more about more like journal-like, and I'm just kind of making responsive things, and I say, well, if this one didn't work out, I'll make another one. So kind of quantity, I guess, helps it a little bit. But yeah, when I moved to New York City, I just started sending stuff out everywhere, and I just kind of gave myself like a year or 2 year limit, where I'll say, well, this is the time where I'll just try everything I possibly can think of, and I would just, collect art directors' names and have a list of things, and then I'll just, at night, I'll have a glass of wine and just mail them all out. And this is actually how I got the New Yorker cover, where I found their email online. I didn't even know if that was their real email, and I just started sending them about 5 finished paintings per month or something. It'll be like a good exercise for me. I'll think of where does my work belong, and I thought, actually before I started making fake New Yorkers, and my friends were like, this is great, you should make an actual one. I was like, all right. so I would send a few things out, and I never heard back from them until one day they're like, we'll use this one. I was like, oh, you were there, okay. so I think it's sort of, it's still unpleasant, and it's not fun, but I think, thinking about like changing how you think about the end goal, that the end goal is not necessarily to get this one job, that it could be like more jobs, or if you didn't, if you got rejected by one art director, there are a lot other art directors, so maybe that wasn't the right person to work with anyway, or, you might end up with something even better. Just keep thinking of what you want to do. I guess.
So can I ask you started by saying, I don't know whether it was a joke or not, meditation.
Yeah.
Do you meditate?
Oh yeah. Actually, that helps.
Let's
that
come
helps
around
a lot.
to that. I'd like to hear more about that.
I have a lot of problems. I had a lot of problems with anxiety, and I kind of researched a lot into it. And mindful meditation actually really helps me a ton. And I think it's also, when I read about it, I'm like, yes, this is already what I think, but now I also have this practice that helps. And I think sitting, because when you paint, I have students sometimes who take my classes and they say, I paint because it relaxes me, and I think, oh my God, what's your, because for me, as soon as I sit down, everything comes, like everything, the insecurities, people's voices, like this person did this, and this person did this great thing, and I'll never do this, or, just started to think about, and then, learning mindful meditation, where you're like, this is just a thought, it's just weather, so it's something that I really, helps me a lot.
Do you mind if I ask one other follow-up on that? I just want to, so can you don't strike me necessarily as somebody, I hope I've just known you a couple of days, but it seems, did meditation come easily to you?
No, I think, I think I'm kind of a person who's open-minded to things anyway, but I think for someone who's like, who overthinks, or it's hard to start, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was affecting my health, so I was like, I'll try a bunch of different things and see what helps.
Just one more. Can you just tell us a little bit about your practice, your meditation?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I actually learned the John Kabat-Zinn. I got it from like the tape. I learned it from the tapes, so maybe I'm doing it wrong all the time, but it helps me. But yeah, I lived in Eugene, Oregon, which is very hippie. And so it was easy to like get into a lot of things. So I started like gardening and things I never thought I'd do when I was like a crazy Russian woman in the city. So yeah, it helped, and a lot of my friends were sort of into that, and so it was sort of like good to be in that. Maybe that's why I was drawn there.
That's
I was
great.
like, maybe I need to be in a quiet place for a bit.
How many people in the room meditate? Raise your hands. I'm just curious. This is great. I just wanted to know. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Now, questions? Yes, Emma.
Hi.
Hi.
I actually have a ton.
Oh yeah, just ask away. I
First-
talked fast, so I finished early.
One, I love Eugene, Oregon, and I love that you love Eugene, Oregon.
Nice.
But that's not a question. You were, in the beginning, you were talking about like all the friends that you would like draw and like take on their style and experiment with that. And I think that's really great, but I was wondering if you ever got any flack for that, because I feel like I did when I tried to do stuff like that. And I'm wondering if you had that experience.
Well, no, usually, when with people I know, we kind of share. It's like a sharing thing. So like they tell me things, I tell them things. Like I tell them, oh, this is how I use my gouache, or even like invite them over, or like I'll show them my tools and I'll show them exactly how I do things, because I think eventually everybody does things differently. So it's sort of like, and when my students sometimes need to, they don't know how to do something, and when I was younger, I'll just say, or even still, like I'll find an artist that I like, I'll copy them just to study them and then take what I need and then sort of, because there are no two people who are the same. I think there's people who just copy and there's nothing behind it. So I think then you can see that it's sort of, it's flat, so it's just mimicry. But if you have something to say and you're just looking for different, you're like, well, like words, it's like you're learning different languages, or like, I don't know the word for this, and then you go to like, the dictionary or the Met Museum, and you say, oh, that's how you do like reflections on a cup, or, or so I think, nobody works in a vacuum. Everybody's influenced by something, whether you do consciously or subconsciously. It's better that you do it consciously, because then it's a process rather than something that just happens by mistake. But it's fine if it happens by mistake, because we're, visual culture, we kind of see things, and then we, and actually sometimes I'll think of like a New Yorker idea and I'll go, oh, I'll draw this, and then I'll like look online and say like, oh, someone's already done it. So I think also sometimes like when you start to think in a certain way, you kind of, get on a wavelength and you end up like maybe doing something similar to someone else. But in these examples with my friends, it's like a sharing thing. Like she tells me like, this is, on surface design, we looked at trends and this is trendy, or like da-da-da-da. So it's kind of more like, we tell each other that we're going to try, and then the other person's really happy. They're like, oh. Or hopefully, I don't know. Maybe they're hiding it inside.
That's really nice. That's awesome.
Does that answer, or is that,
Yeah,
did you?
no,
Oh,
that's
okay. So any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, so you talked about a lot of your process when it comes to traditional art, and I see that you do a fairly big meaning in your traditional art.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you too well. Can you?
I
Sorry.
heard that I can see that you do a fair bit of animating in your own traditional art. Can you go about some of the process that it takes to animate these paintings?
Sure. So I actually when I was an undergrad, I went for illustration, and I had an animation minor. So I actually wanted to be an animator more than an illustrator at some point, but I loved handmade animation. So I would just sit and draw like 50 frames a day. So that's another reason why I kind of draw so fast, because I can produce a lot in a day. Can we turn these down? Actually, they're really bright. I think they might not.
I can try.
So it's very simple, and I actually didn't want to continue with animation because most of the animation programs in the States are computer animation, and I didn't really like that. I like the sort of tactile, like puppet animation, old Russian, Soviet, stop motion stuff, and so it's just very simple, like frame by frame. That's kind of what I do. These, like the one I showed at the end, was just a painting, and then I just took it apart in different layers and moved them around and just saved each frame, and then I just put it together in Photoshop so it looks like it's moving. So very, very simple, but you can actually learn a lot of it for the Photoshop. I just Googled animation in Photoshop, and there were tutorials, but like the basics are the same. So yeah, you can, if there's something you see that you like to do, there's always like, it's good to know what you want to do. Like if you know what you want to learn, then you can find the different sources for that. It's harder if you don't know where you want to go next, and you're like, well, I'm not sure. So then it's good to look at other artists or experiment. Does that answer it? Or any other questions?
Yeah, one right over here.
I was wondering about the presentation of your work, because I know a lot of artists have different ideas on when they have clients like the New Yorker, whether it's going to be a high quality photo or a scan. And I was kind of wondering what your process was for illustration that is going to be mass produced.
That's a great question, and I actually learned that in my undergrad. This sort of going back to some of the things they taught us was really helpful, like thinking about the final product and where it would end up. Like I had like a flashback of it when I was doing the Washington Post one, because I remember them saying like sometimes the printing is so bad in newspapers that you have to look at your values, so you can turn your picture into black and white and see if it comes out. Otherwise, like all the colors might be washed out and they won't see all your details. And gouache also partially why I chose it is it scans really well. Watercolor, usually if you paint it on like bumpy paper, when you scan it you get all the textures. I paint on hot press paper, and the gouache is so flat that when you put it in Photoshop it's really easy to like fix the colors and put things on layers. And the reason why I paint, I just love like the tactile stuff. I think anything, I'm not like a digital snob. Like I love, digital artwork. I think it's great, but I like the painted stuff. So I usually just scan everything at 600 or higher DPI, and then have a smaller version. When I send things to clients, it has to be small enough. You don't want to like send them a gigantic, thing. They'll never open it. They'll think it's spam. So then, yeah, it has to be like pretty presentable. So I'll spend quite a little bit of time on Photoshop, just like tweaking and seeing that nothing is sort of that the background's clean and everything's like nice. And it's really important. Presentation makes a big difference, and that's something I always like try to tell my students when they like hang something up like sideways. I'm like, you don't want people looking at the bad stuff around the art. You want them to just see the art and nothing else. So that's one part where I always kind of look at it, and I get really nitpicky with everything. That's and then sometimes I look at my old art that I sent to clients. I'm like, oh, how could I send that? I was like, that's horrendous. But they gave me a job. Okay, that's fine. So, does that answer? Do you have any other questions?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I have one more question.
Sure.
It's kind of quick. So you were saying earlier in your presentation, when you got your first cover for the New Yorker, you were just like sending pictures in. Did you just send like pictures that you liked, or did they follow a certain like prompt?
I just send them random like city related things. I had actually my friend Gail Baker, who we were talking about before, and she did a cover, and I actually sent her. We were pen pals before, and I was like, oh, do you have any advice? So she just gave me like a few little tips on, she's like, they like seasons and stuff like that. But I think a lot of my stuff that got in were like really random. They weren't really seasonal. I guess this one kind of had like fall colors, so that even though it had nothing to do with fall. Well, I guess you eat pastries because it's cold.
That's why we do it.
It's always cold.
Just one more question,
Sure.
because we are all, Jenny and all of us are here are living out on Peaks Island, and we're going to do the tyranny of the ferry. So I'll take one more. And Emma, you said you wanted a second one, so go ahead. Yeah.
It seems like you have a lot of many ongoing projects or like series that you continually work on.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep motivation to keep putting those together, and also like how do you keep your head like sane?
I think it's easier once you have a series, because then it's sort of like, this worked before, I'll do it again. And then I think the harder part is to start doing something that's totally different, or like try a different style. And I think I actually worry more about just like doing too many similar things, and like my mom, who's like, she's sometimes like, you have to stop doing the same thing. I was like, thanks, Mom. So I guess it's like I just kind of try to do what makes me happy, or what I still think is and I think people, there are a lot of very interesting people in New York City, and situations and weird things that happen. So I think I actually have too many ideas, and I have about I think I have about 500 gigabyte of photos just from when I moved to New York 3 years ago, and it's like a backlog. I was like, I have to do all these photos. They're still waiting for me. So
There we go.
So.
Jenny, thanks
Thank
again.
you. Oh, thank you
so much.